Good day, my name is Jay Paloma, and for this video, we will discuss implementing Internet-Based Client Management, or IBCM, on System Center 2012 R2 Configuration Manager. Okay, before we proceed, I would like to have some expectation setting. This video provides a high-level step-by-step instructions on how to set up Internet-based client management on System Center 2012 R2 Configuration Manager. This video is a short video on the exact configuration manager requirements. It does not discuss infrastructure related items like Active Directory or positioning of database and so on and so forth. Okay, so this one is just configuration manager and all the directly related elements in the solution. Also, the infrastructure that will be presented in this video may not be reflective of a real production implementation. And lastly, the viewer is expected to possess technical knowledge enough to determine which actions are performed to make the demo work, okay? And which ones are necessary to get the functionality working. Say, for example, we have both internet and intranet on the same subnet, which in the real world scenario will never happen. So again, this is a working lab environment, but the viewer is expected to actually identify which ones are for demo and which ones are really just expected for functionality of the internet-based client management solution. When we implement IBCM on System Center 2012 R2 Configuration Manager, we need to be aware. We need to do these things. First is to implement HTTPS on your configuration manager infrastructure. Then we need to configure the site system with an internet fully qualified domain name. This one we do on the site system properties of the configuration management console. Then we will need to configure the site roles to accept internet-only clients. That will be for your IBCM servers, for your internet-based servers. Fourth, we will need to configure the clients to be able to see whether it is on the internet or intranet, which will be discussed later. And finally, testing. Say you shift your client from internet to intranet. So how will you test your client to see if it's internet already, and how will you configure that your IBCM infrastructure works? So what is internet-based client management? Basically, IBCM is simply having certain configuration manager site roles that are directly connected to the internet. So, but it will use the same configuration management infrastructure. So, when would it be good to use IBCM? One example, one scenario that I'm thinking of is if your organization has bring your own device policies. So users can bring their own devices, and all those user-owned devices are actually treated as hostile, and then the company, the organization's infrastructure is in such a way as that it widely uses virtualization, and all the client compute, all the bring your own devices are actually quote-unquote connected to the internet for them to access the infrastructure. So in this case, if we segregate off the bring your own device, the user-owned devices into what can be known as an internet zone, if you may, then it will be best that these devices are actually, for security purposes, these devices are actually managed by configuration management servers that are internet-based. Okay, so that's one of the scenarios that I'm thinking of. Others might be, say, you use your internet-based servers to as a remediation quarantine network for remediation purposes. Okay, and there are other scenarios where we can use this internet-based management. Implementing HTTPS on Configuration Manager. The first thing that we need to do before we can implement IBCM on our Configuration Manager infrastructure is to implement HTTPS on our Configuration Manager. Now, this topic is too long for this entire presentation. That's why you need to read up and view the video series that I created on implementing HTTPS on System Center 2012 R2 Configuration Manager. You can find the 4-part video series on the link below. After you successfully implement HTTPS on your Configuration Manager infrastructure, your next task is to provide a fully qualified domain name for your site system. Now, in this lab demo, I have two SCCM servers. One is CMSRV1, that will be my primary site server. That's also my a management point, a distribution point, and a software update point. Now, CMSRV2 will now be configured as my internet-based client management. It is not a site server. It is a site system, and it is installed with a DP, MP, and SUP roles. So our first task after we implement HTTPS is to configure our IBCM server with a fully qualified domain name. So to do that, we go to Site System, right-click on our site system, click on Properties, and we now specify a fully qualified domain name for this machine. Now, for purposes of this demo, my FQDN for this machine would be the same as my FQDN on the internet and the intranet as well. So this will be CMSRV2 my company.local. So it's the same as my Active Directory FQDN. Now there's a checkbox here, require the site server to initiate connections to this site system. This is useful if, say, the site system is actually located at your DMZ zone. Then that DMZ zone, you are not allowed by policy to initiate connections from the DMZ to your internal network, but you are allowed to initiate connections from your internal network to DMZ. Then you can check this checkbox. Remember, in our firewall rules for SCCM, all site systems have firewall bidirectional firewall ports allowed between. So if that's not allowed, if it's only one direction from the internal network to the DMZ, then you can check this so that every time there's a communication between your site server and site system, it will be the site server that will initiate the connection. Okay, so I will just leave that unchecked. Again, specify a fully qualified domain name. Then we type in the FQDN, click apply, and click OK. We will now configure the management point to respond only to internet connections. So by default, I'm now in the management point property. So by default, again, we should have configured this role for HTTPS. The default setting is allow intranet only connections. So for us to make this an internet only IBCM site system, we just click this, and we will now allow internet only connections. Okay, so for this demo, we will do this for all three roles, the MP, the DP, and SUP. So click apply and click OK on the management point role. So now we are in the properties of the distribution point. So same as in the management point we did earlier under HTTPS here, we just click this drop down box and we now allow internet only connections. Click on apply and click on OK. So this is the SUP properties. Again, we configure this. It just looks a little different, but the concept is still the same. We now click this to allow internet-only client connections at the SUP. Click on apply and click on OK. A few notes for you to configure the clients. When you configure the clients, make sure that your client has PKI certificate enrolled. Okay, it has to have the client certificate. Then, when you install the configuration manager client, the following parameters are important when we implement IBCM. First is the CCM host name. CCM host name should be in equals the internet MP fully qualified domain name. So what's the purpose of this? For your internet clients, it needs an internet MP, but since it's internet connected, it doesn't have the usual way for clients inside the corporate network to look for a management point. That's why we can configure the CCM host name so that you point directly to one MP. So once the client detects that it is internet connected, then it will automatically look for the first management point. It will look for this internet MP that you indicate here. If your client is always connected to the internet, similar to the scenario where I mentioned that you are the company has BYOD policies and all user-owned devices are internet-based, then we can add the CCM always inf equals 1 parameter. Okay, again, use only for internet only clients, and it should be used in conjunction with the CCM hostname and the CCM site code flags. And last, the CCM site code, going back, the CCM site code flags, flag in CCM always inf equals 1 has to be there because, again, since the client is always on the internet, there will be no way for configuration manager to identify what site code will this client become a member of. That's why if we use CCM always inf equals 1, then we should have CCM host name to point it to its internet MP and CCM site code so that you can assign it a site membership. And lastly, we also should use the /use PKI cert when we install the SCCM client so that we're sure that it will use the certificate that we enrolled on this client machine. So installing the client is fairly straightforward. There are a couple of parameters in the CCM setup command that we need to take to consider to allow IBCM to work properly. I've copied already the client here on the client software here on the local machine. And I will now type in the command. It says CCM setup /use PKI cert, so that this client will use the certificate that we imported earlier, CCM host name, and we will now point to the our internet-based MP. SMS MP will be our intranet-based MP. and our fallback status point if you use that facility. Then we need to assign this a site code. Okay, right here, it seems like nothing's happening, but we can check out the status of our client installation in the CCM setup logs. CCM setup. Logs folder, and just make sure you have CM trace on your machine. CCM setup. And from here, we can see the status of our client installation. Okay, so after you install the configuration manager client, you have to double check if the client was successfully installed in the CCM setup.log. Okay, but let's assume that it's properly installed. You will see the configuration manager applet in control panel. So for us to test if our parameters, if our SCCM client installation was successful, first we go to the general tab of the configuration manager control panel applet properties. Under client certificate, this should display PKI. Okay, that's first. Second, in the testing, whether we are in internet or intranet mode, we have to check this connection type. Now, since in this currently we are connected to the internal network, basically we have access to Active Directory, then we will see that this connection type would be currently intranet. That's a second checking point that we have to consider. The next is go to this network, and under internet-based management point FQDN, you should see the fully qualified domain name of the, when you install the client, you have the CCM hostname parameter that you indicated. You should see the FQDN of that. Okay, so again, three things that we need to check for the client. We have client certificate should be PKI. Connection type, depending on the client connectivity that time, should either be currently intranet or currently internet. Then under network, we should have the fully qualified domain name of our internet-based management point. This would be the MP that we configured to have internet only. At this point, we only can configure one of these management points. Okay, so what are the log files that we need to take a look at to double check? Okay, I'll be very frank. As of the time that I recorded this video, I'm still at the stage of figuring out how the Windows firewall rules. It's easy to think that hey, just block stuff. Okay. Ideally, if the client cannot detect a domain controller, then it will be rendered as an internet client. Once the location of the client is in such a way as it cannot detect a domain controller, you will see that after some time, the configuration manager client will be automatically configured as internet. Now, in this lab, I tried blocking off from my domain controller all traffic from the client, but it still doesn't work. So right now we don't have a real scenario that where I can shift from internet and intranet. Maybe after I publish this video, once I figure this thing out, or I have a firewall to test with, then I will have an update in my blog on how to test this without, the simplest lab setup where you can have IBCM, you can switch between internet and intranet. Okay, so going back to the log files for you to check where the client is connected. Actually, I use the location services log, and I also use the client location.log. Okay, in the client location.log, you can see here that the domain joined client is in intranet. Actually, something that I can simulate right now is if I disable this network, if I disable this network adapter, then after some time, this client will become domain join client is in unknown location. Okay, and the SCCM client will actually display internet, but since we don't have a network connectivity, then we won't be able to see the client actually doing its thing while connected to the internet MP. Okay, so you will see here what to expect is this. If your client is connected to intranet, then you will see the MPs. Okay, they change every once in a while. The MPs will actually shift only between. Let me repeat that again. If once your client is in intranet, then you will see that your client will actually shift only between the intranet management points. If your client is in internet, then your client will shift between the internet management points. Okay, so that's a good thing with internet-based client management. If you're in internet, it won't actually try to look for any intranet management points. Okay, so that's the beauty of having this internet-based client management. So in summary, to implement internet-based client management on your configuration manager infrastructure, you need to remember the following things. First, you need to implement HTTPS on your configuration manager infrastructure. Then you need to configure your site system with an internet fully qualified domain name. This gives the site system the ability to choose whether clients from the internet or from intranet or from both will be able to connect to it. Then you configure the different site roles to accept internet-only clients. The key roles here would be your management point. That's perhaps the most critical one. Then your distribution points, and finally your software update points. Here in this video, we learned how to configure all those three roles to accept internet-only clients. And finally, and you need to configure the clients. Remember that IBCM is actually works because of the coordination between the client and the site systems that are internet configured to accept only internet clients. Again, the clients have to be configured with to point to an internet-based management point. Have to be configured with a certificate, and for clients that are always connected, they have to be configured as such. And finally, testing. For testing your client, you need to have a test environment or test methodology where once your client is connected to the internet, connected from accessing configuration manager from the internet, then you should be able to see that from the clients, the client location is internet, and it is able to access only the internet-based servers. And the moment that your clients become connected through the intranet, then you will see that the client is able to access the intranet site services. For more information, you can actually go to this Microsoft TechNet article planning for configuration communications in Configuration Manager. Thank you very much for viewing this video. This has been Jay Paloma.